I've got 3 questions for you.
Get in the vortex, get in the vortex, get in the vortex.
Now for lunch.
Time for lunch.
I'm working on a documentary right now on a film about natural gas. And it was a really neat creation. It's up in Northwest Louisiana. And last year, and I started following the story of all these, it's an economic miracle, I guess, with all these people attracting money attracting money and dollars from this gas fund. But what happened is very analogous to, I guess, the country where half the city is mad at the gas company and in lawsuits, and half the city received money. And I end up following 3 people. 2 of them are mad and one of them's happy. My first question is, and they're in a lawsuit, but I find it really interesting and funny, and she's very, upbeat and such. How do I stay aligned following this woman to show her story? Because in the end, it's a very positive ending. My Reverend Ronnie gets $1 million, and he's very much an Abraham person. So it's a very positive ending, but I have contrast in the movie. And sometimes I get drawn into it, and, they're really angry at this gas company. So when you watch the news or anything of that nature, how do you stay aligned, and how do I put that in the movie and not make I don't want to say Michael Moore movie. That's not my intention, but how do I show that contrast to set up the ending, which is really positive?
Well, because the laws of the universe are precise, and because law of attraction never varies, then you depict a movie that shows in the vortex, not in the vortex, in the vortex, not in the vortex. In other words, because, and the thing that's interesting, there are movies that distort that, and then they don't ring true. And a lot of people watch movies that distort it, that don't ring true, and then they're confused about real life experiences. But law of attraction always rings true. You just cannot stand outside the vortex in protest against someone who's wronged you and receive your reward. You have to give up the struggle at some point. Now, the greater the struggle, the more you put in the vortex. You want to depict that. In other words, there's nothing wrong with showing the pathos that is natural to life and the desire that is born out of it. But if you depict someone winning and triumphing without having given up their resistance, then you are distorting the laws of the universe as we know them to be.
Right, and my ending is very, very positive, of my Reverend Morris per se, and that's what I wanted to say. I don't want to push against and make one of those documentaries about global warming or this corrupt company, because some people do feel that way, and I do want to show her story. But in the end, a man walks in and gives $1 million to this minister, and it's a really upbeat ending. But I don't know if I'm repeating myself. There's a lot of contrast that I think I need to show to set up the ending.
Well, that falls into the category of there's nothing, you never hear us say, we want you to avoid step 1. So there's no reason to avoid step 1 in the movie. In other words, step 1 is an actual consequence of life. But you see, sometimes people do get in lawsuits, and they do all stand outside the vortex. And they do have a winner and a loser. And so there are those who would say, but Abraham, none of these people were happy. They were all mad at each other. They were all outside of the vortex, and one of them lost and one of them won. And we say, but if you follow through and you watch that longer and you see that that person who had a lawsuit and then pushed against and then won in the lawsuit and maintained their stance outside the vortex, if you stay with them long enough, you will see the detrimental experience that comes to anyone who holds themselves outside the vortex. In other words, it's just always the same way. You might win the money, but you lose your health, or you might win. In other words, if you watch a lot, because what you're wanting to win, and this is what our friend was asking earlier, what's that deep thing? And we said it's the resonance or the knowing or the well-being. That's what you're winning. You're reaching for alignment with your expanded self. So as this lawsuit ensues, and you know what you don't want and you know what you do want, sometimes in a lawsuit, a lot of clarity comes. You want a lot of things that you find yourself not just wanting justice, you want people to win. Not just want them to win money, you want them to have stability in their lives. Not just stability in their lives, you want them to have peace and well-being. You want them to have the resolve. It's a terrible world when you believe that you must, in a contentious fashion, fight and grovel and grind and push against in order to have your winning. And so, if you can show that contrast caused clarity, And once the clarity happened, that the attention was put upon the clarity, and there was not a deviation from what was wanted, and that along with the winning of the lawsuit came the money, of course, but came alignment as well, and harmony, and lack of vengeance, and lack of pushing against, and understanding. In other words, no one inside the vortex uses anyone, as their excuse to feel bad, ever, you see.
And that's what I want to show in my ending. I guess I've caught myself sometimes getting my fingers in the sticker briar, where the analogy is, of seeing this woman and she's really angry, and she serves a purpose. And I'm trying not to
just keep clear in your mind of whether it's a step 1 or a step 3 moment. And there are these theories and these processes in movies. In other words, they have all of these formulas of, in the first scene you have to do this to your audience, and the second scene you have to do this and this and this, and we say, whatever roller coaster you want to take them on, in, out, in, out, in, out, in, out, in, and out of the vortex, until you have brought your audience into the vortex with your heroine, you will not have taught them anything. So the movie has to move them. If you're wanting to do the movie that we feel that you're reaching for, your movie has to move them inside the vortex, which means they have to find the relief too. And in most movies, you do such a good job of activating in the audience all the injustices and all the things that they're irritated with, that even though your heroine moves inside the vortex, your audience is still out here. And then they think a miracle happened, and then they're running around looking for a miracle. Unless you move your audience in the way that you're wanting to move your heroine, you have not accomplished anything teaching-wise in your movie.
So how would I do that with the ending? Because I'm hearing what you're saying. I'm trying to get more clarity on that with the ending. Because right now the movie's called Naturally Gas is Good, and in the ending you see
by employing the people who are ultimately winning as winning more than the money. They won clarity, and they used the power of their focus, and they right into the movie that they're not bad mouthing the others, and they've done something totally different. They've not made the adversary the enemy, and they are kind enough to be willing to see both sides, but understanding that this is what's best for them. They were single-minded about it, and they maybe even made lists of appreciation about what happened. In other words, they brought themselves into alignment. And speak it in a way that those who watch it can hear. In other words, there are other things to win. In other words, even in the closing arguments, when you're not sure who's actually going to win, and this person is softened so much that she's not standing in opposition like she once was at the first of the movie, you could even have someone say something like, it seems like you've lost your way. You're not standing up for what we believe in the way we want you to. And she could say something like, there are more things to stand up for than money. Many more things to stand up for, like harmony, and like community, and like appreciating one's neighbors, and like loving others, and like understanding that we're all in this together, and like liberty and justice for all. In other words, put all the words in that you're wanting. In other words, but when you're inside the vortex, you really, 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 really win.
Right, and I have one character who does that, and that's what I'm ultimately trying to...
If you wanted to really do something interesting, you could let your heroine not win the lawsuit.
I don't think she is.
But become so joyful in the process by, in other words, she didn't win the money because she wasn't willing to play that game. But she did win alignment, and she did win enlightenment, and she did find love, and she did find clarity, and she did get ideas about the rest of her life, and she did find a way to be happy, and she did find future experience, and she did find something that she really believes in, and she did find a community that she loves, and she did find, in other words, and then you can just leave it with that. You can watch some nasty person who fought and scrapped their way right into the winning, and then you can see her waltzing out, and you can just leave it with your audience. Who won here?
Fetcher.
Or whatever you want.
No, I appreciate the clarity. How do these documentaries or films, or the CEO of this gas company, he's really successful, yet he has a lot of people really angry at him and lawsuits. The founder of Starbucks is suing him. I mean, just tons of lawsuits. You talked about documentaries, but, Al Gore made a documentary about global warming, and then it wins.
Here's an important question.
Yes.
So, do you think that it's possible to be inside the vortex and have someone sue you?
Sure.
Yes. But when you're inside the vortex and someone sues you, it doesn't jerk you outside the vortex. And so you can't have any losses when you're inside the vortex, because all the way along the universe will line you up. In other words, so people outside the vortex are looking for everybody to blame. They're suing all over the place, you see. But they don't really win, because it's not about anything other than alignment.
How do some of these successful documentaries or films, I mean, I'm talking about documentaries because I'm working on one, but they do push against the Michael Moore movies or the global warming movies, but they also, the message that a lot of filmmakers would see is, hey, that won the Academy Award or the Nobel Peace Prize, or it made $100 million.
Well, it's the reason for a while you heard us offering we see you take your boat down to the stream and you deliberately point it upstream and begin paddling very hard. And we say, why not turn and go with the flow? And you say, oh, that seems so simple. The awards are all given to those who struggle. The books that are most revered are those where you've dug a very deep hole for yourself, and then when you climb out, people clap. In other words, there is a lot of credence in your physical form given to people who are willing to pay the price. But the message that we're offering, we're not trying to get you to stop doing step one. We think that all of that is part of what makes you become. We are just wanting you at some point to give up the struggle and reap the benefit of the struggle. And that's the thing that that's the flawed premise of all flawed premises. People do not realize that until they give up the struggle, they do not win, you see. There's no winning until you let go of the resistance that lets you have this. And so there are a lot of people living very mediocre lives who are outside the vortex, squabbling over crumbs, really living very small, petty, mediocre lives in comparison with who they have become. And that's why no amount of winning and no amount of money and no amount of accolades and no amount brings them happy. That's why so many of them that people revere, and then they commit suicide and they wonder what went wrong. Why was that person shouldn't have been unhappy? They had everything. We say, unless you've got alignment, unless you are in alignment with who you are, you really have not won, you see. And so the message that we are offering, louder and louder it seems, as we want you to hear it more, volume doesn't seem to help, however, is what we want you to come round to, and your questions cue it up perfectly, is that what you are reaching for is the expansion that you have already discovered. That is what everyone wants, you see. And it's not about winning this from this. It's about this struggle making me become this and me wanting to come into alignment with it. And you can have it all. We're not saying you have to lose your financial battles in order to be in the vortex. We're saying let the most important thing to you be the vortex, and everything in your life will come into alignment. There is no law of assertion. When we ask about, can someone sue you if you are really consistently in the vortex? And of course, people can hold unkind thoughts or even offer unkind actions, but law of attraction will not match you up in a meaningful way with those who are very different vibrationally than you are. It just cannot stand. But you could be in the vortex and out, and in the vortex and out, and in the vortex and out enough that you are a vibrational match, you see. Someone who is truly consistently working to get into and staying inside the vortex, consistently inside the vortex, does not experience the impossibility of someone asserting something unwanted into their experience. You only get what's vibrationally active within you. So once you clean up your vibration and get in the vortex often, now the universe is going to deliver to you a means. That's what our friend was asking about earlier when he was reflecting back on the story that we told about getting deeper and deeper into the wanting. In other words, certainly there are things that are lawsuit in nature that feel wrong, and you just want to wrestle into the ground and kill them or have your way or make him stop what they're doing. But in all of that, what you're really doing is clarifying who you really are and what you really want. And until you let go of that struggle, you can't be what you really want. And the true losing of the battle, or the true discord, is in not letting yourself be who life has caused you to be. It's not the losing of the lawsuit. In other words, that person who